O humankind, we created you from a single pair of a male and a female, yet made you into nations and tribes, that ye may know each other, not that ye may despise each other. From the Holy Quran. This virus has no eyes, and yet it knows exactly how we see each other and how we treat each other. There is no vaccine for racism. We have to do the work. Kamala Harris. For there to be peace in the world, there must be peace in the heart. Low C. Randy will light our chalice this morning. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lit the flame within us and the community. Before we sing the first hymn, let me remind you to leave yourselves muted. However, we want you and whoever is with you to sing with Jan or Mary as big and loud as you like. Make it a joyful experience. So let's sing the opening responsive hymn, We Begin Again in Love, number 1037.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our fears made us rigid and inaccessible.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time we have struck out in anger without just cause.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For each time that our greed has blinded us to the need of others.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For the selfishness that set us apart and alone.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For losing sight of our unity.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
For those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness.
We forgive ourselves and each other. We begin again in love.
Good morning. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist community of Cambria. We're glad you have joined us today. As a Unitarian Universalist community, we celebrate religious diversity and welcome all who journey in search of faith and spirituality. The UUCC is a lay-led congregation inviting speakers from different religious traditions and spiritual or scientific backgrounds to speak in our pulpit. We encourage presentations covering a variety of topics and areas of interest to our community that connect with the UU's 7 principles. Today's service centers around the 3rd principle. We affirm and promote acceptance of one another and encouragement to spiritual growth in our congregations. Spiritual growth isn't about a vertical ascent to heaven, but about growth in every dimension at once. It's spirituality in 3D. Growth in spirit doesn't measure one's proximity to a God above, but rather the spaciousness of one's own soul, its volume, its capacity, its size. We need souls that can take in the world in all its complexity and diversity, yet still maintain our integrity. And we need souls that can love and be in relationships with all of this complexity. Instead of fight or flight, we need spiritual posture of embrace. My name is Judy Butler, and I am your worship associate this morning.
Hi, Judy.
I'd like to extend a special welcome to today's guests and visitors. We're glad you joined us this morning under these challenging circumstances. If you're not on our mailing list, please visit our website at www.uuccambria.org so that we can keep you informed about all our activities. And a reminder, if you wish to see this or any of our past Zoom services, again, recordings of these services can be found on the UUCC website and Facebook as well. The membership committee invites non-members to consider becoming a member of the congregation. Please contact Janet Cooper or a board member if you're interested. Thank you. So good morning and welcome to everyone. Now let's recite the affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. We set aside this time for any short announcements that would be of interest to our UU community members and friends. Please keep your items short and to the point. For any items that need more explanation, please call or email the person after the service to be respectful of everyone's time. If you have an announcement, please raise your hand by clicking on the raise hand button near the lower right of your participant's window. When Susan calls your name, click the unmute me button near the lower left of the participant's window, then speak.
Amanda, would you please unmute yourself and share your announcement?
Thank you. I just wanted to let people know today at 1 p.m. There's going to be a movement for the People's Party online. I look for it on YouTube. Speaking are going to be Nina Turner, Mike Gravel, Cornell West, Marianne Williamson, Jesse Ventura, Jimmy Dore, and Chris Hedges, among others. That's at 1 p.m. They're working for a new party called the People's Party. 1 p.m. today.
Thank you, Amanda. Lou, would you please unmute yourself and share your announcement?
Just a reminder that there are 5 Mondays in August, and so the men's group is not meeting tomorrow, but we will meet the first Monday of September in a week.
Susan, it's Andy. I have an announcement, but I can't raise my hand.
Sure. Go ahead, Andy.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Good morning. This announcement is especially appropriate given today's topic. At the most recent meeting of the worship committee, I proposed an addition to our Sunday services, which I believe can be both spiritual and at the same time help to strengthen the fabric of our community, something called a moment of witness. And the committee has agreed to give it a try. A moment of witness in this context is an opportunity for members of the UUCC to share gratitude for something about their experience within the congregation, or more broadly within Unitarian Universalism, something that has had a profound impact on their life. These sharings should be written out ahead of time and only last a minute or two at the most. We will set aside time on the third Sunday of each month, following announcements, for one member to share their moment of witness. We especially hope this will provide an opportunity for members who are heard from less often to share their experiences. If you'd like to share a moment of witness, please contact a member of the worship committee, and we will do our best to add you to a future Sunday service. Thanks.
Thank you, Andy. And that's the announcements for this morning. So Judy, we're back to you.
Thank you, Susan. Next week, we will hear Who's the Creator by Nick Filson. Sharing together some of our personal and significant joys and concerns brings us closer as a faith community. We invite you to share the milestones that are deeply felt as a part of your personal life. But please be mindful and considerate of all who come to worship with us this morning. This is a time of community building. Okay. The collected flames of these candles also embody all the joys and sorrows which may have gone unspoken today, but are also deeply felt in this community. The first reading is an excerpt from The Warmth of Other Suns by Isabel Wilkerson. Contrary to modern day assumptions, for much of the history of the United States, from the draft riots of the 1860s to the violence over desegregation a century later, riots were often carried out by disaffected whites against groups perceived as threats to their survival. Thus, riots would become to the north what lynchings were to the south, each a display of uncontained rage to put upon people directed toward the scapegoats of their condition. Nearly every big northern city experienced one or more during the 20th century. Each outbreak pitted two groups that had more in common with each other than either of them realized. Both sides were made up of rural and small town people who had traveled far in search of the American dream. Both relegated to the worst jobs by industrialists who pitted one group against the other. Each side was struggling to raise its families in a cold, fast, alien place far from their homelands and looked down upon by the earlier, more sophisticated arrivals. They were essentially the same people, except for the color of their skin. And many of them arrived into these anonymous receiving stations at around the same time, one set against the other and unable to see the commonality of their mutual plight. And now it's time for a meditation. Let us enter into a place of peace and serenity where you are the one with your spiritual being. Be at peace within your space where the absence of all that is temporal is its most cherished gift. Let us enter the stillness. The second reading is from the introduction to an article entitled "The UUA Meets Black Power" by Warren R. Ross, which appeared in the UU World magazine in 2000. Two shocks jolted the Unitarian Universalist Association soon after its formation. Both were related to the struggle for racial justice, but while one unified the denomination, sustaining its self-image of being on the right side of the struggle, the other shattered this easy assumption and inflicted wounds that still have not healed. First, in 1965 came the murder of Reverend James Reeb, a Unitarian Universalist minister, while he was in Selma, Alabama, demonstrating for Black civil rights. Second, only 4 years later, many Black delegates and their white supporters walked out of the General Assembly in Boston to protest what they considered a racist vote. What had seemed so obvious after Selma, that in the fight for racial justice, it was us, the good guys, versus them, the racist, suddenly wasn't so obvious after all. The line between us and them no longer seemed so clear. Why? What had happened? 30 years later, we're still struggling with these and related questions. Perhaps this search for answers can help us build on the things we have done right and improve on the things we have done badly since the UUA was formed. From the 2020 June 25th UUA General Assembly, two excerpts from an Amen to Rising Up and Call to Action. Therefore, we will create systemic change within our congregations by revising agreements and policies to create alternatives to policing, including developing plans for safety and accountability. Therefore, we commit to making our congregations and communities authentically multicultural, anti-oppressive spaces that dismantle anti-Blackness, resisting a culture of perfectionism and repairing our mistakes, and given that building the beloved community is an ongoing and ever-evolving process, we commit to staying in this work for the long haul. Jan Callner will now sing "Please Call Me by My True Names, a poem by Thich Nhat Hanh and music by Plum Village. Jan?
My joy is like spring so warm, it makes flowers bloom all over the earth. My veins like a river of tears, so vast it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughter at once, so I can hear that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so that I can wake up and the door of my heart could be left open. Please call me by my true names, so that I can wake up and the door of my heart could be left open.
Thank you, Jan. Today, we end our Summer Sermons by Other People series. During the month of August, members of our community have read sermons written and published by notable clergy and laity, with which the readers have found a deep connection. Today's sermon covers all 7 of our principles. When Faced with Evil, written by Eric Walker Wickstrom, and will be read by Mary Schwalbe. Mary?
Thank you, Judy. Thank you, Jan. Hello, everyone. The Reverend Walker Wickstrom is currently a chaplain resident at the University of Virginia Medical Center in Charlottesville, Virginia. After roughly a quarter of a century of congregational ministry and a brief stint as Director of Worship and Music Resources at the Unitarian Universalist Association headquarters. He's the author of 3 books, Teacher Guide Companion, Rediscovering Jesus in a Secular World, Simply Pray, a modern spiritual practice to deepen your life, and Serving with Grace, Lay Leadership as a Spiritual Practice, which I just finished reading. So if anyone would like to borrow it, please let me know. He's also a juggler, a clown, a magician, fire eater, escape artist, and mask maker. And our church has another connection to Reverend Wickstrom that I did not realize at the time I called to ask to read his sermon. As I'm not one who enjoys phone chat, I nervously introduced myself to him as Mary Schwalbe, music minister, music director of UU Community of Cambria, California. I was so embarrassed that I didn't recognize that he seemed in some way familiar with us. He said something very kind about how it was a natural slip since music is a ministry, which put me at ease. And I shared that is how I feel about my service to our community. Later that same week, I was reading 10 years of Board of Trustees minutes to learn about the history of our bylaws. And I stumbled upon a copy of an email entitled, using the title Music Minister, dated January 26, 2011, from Dolores Miera, board member and treasurer of UUCC, to, coincidentally, Eric Wickstrom, who at that time was serving at the UUA. It's a small world. Kerfuffle. Isn't that a fun word? It sounds like what it means, a commotion or a fuss, especially one caused by opposing views. Ruffled feathers. Well, it sounds like more fun than it really is. But kerfuffles do occasionally occur in congregations. And if I remember correctly, this little email created a kerfuffle, which led to a congregational vote about what my formal title would be. Fortunately, I wasn't a member yet, so I didn't have to vote. And that's a very short story about how I became your humble UUCC music director. So a kerfuffle can be a good thing if it leads to greater understanding and mutual commitment to work together toward resolution and use of the democratic process within our community. And now about today's sermon. One morning in particular, I was wondering why we people always seem to blame the group that we, of course, are not a part of for everything that's wrong with everything. And why is racism so fundamental to our social, economic, and political systems? Then the Pink Floyd song, Us and Them, invaded my head. Today's sermon was written the week following the attacks of September 11 in 2001. I've edited the sermon to include other teachers' voices, past and present. I now give you Eric Walker Wickstrom. For if they are evil and we are not, if that's how we see things, then we are committing the same error which led to this tragedy. That's the problem of evil. Not so much that it exists, in that it is really just a fact of life or a force of nature. The problem of evil, as I see it, is that we are so readily tempted to imagine that it's out there, separated from us over here, that it belongs to them and not us. And that, I believe, is ultimately the root and the design of evil, to make us categorize the world into us and them, rather than recognizing our common kinship. How do we reconcile our Unitarian Universalist optimism, our belief in the inherent worth and dignity of every person, our theological presumption that no doubt the universe is unfolding as it should? How do we reconcile these things with the events that took place in New York City and Washington, D.C. and rural Pennsylvania last Tuesday? How do we make sense of the tragedy that's unfolded and is unfolding still? Upwards of 5,000 people are missing and presumed dead. Countless others are wounded in body and spirit. Innocent men, women, and children whose only crime was being on the wrong plane at the wrong time were used as weapons. It has long been the tactic of terrorists to pack their bombs with bits of glass, broken screws, rusty nails, in order to increase the devastation. These terrorists pack their bombs with people. What are we to do when faced with such evil? It seems that our hymnal is void of resources to turn, to which we can turn and support in times like this. There's no listing for tragedy. There's no listing for evil. But there are these beautifully evocative words from Adrian Rich, which is reading number 463. My heart is moved by all I cannot save. So much has been destroyed. I have cast my lot with those who age after age, perversely, with no extraordinary power, reconstitute the world. We Unitarian Universalists don't talk about evil very much. Maybe that's because our Universalist ancestors believed so strongly in the doctrine of universal salvation, that all souls would be reunited with an ultimately loving God, and that none are destined for an eternity in hell. If you take away hell, perhaps the idea of evil doesn't make quite so much sense because there's nowhere to put it. Or maybe it's because our Unitarian ancestors were so convinced of humanity's ability to climb onward and upward, to rise above our basest instincts. An old joke has it that Universalists believe God is too loving to damn humanity, and that Unitarians believed humanity is too good to be damned. Perhaps it is that our Unitarian Universalist rationalism has been so infused with the psychological mythologies of our day that turn demons into conditions, that evil has become maladjustment and bad choices. By whatever route, it seems that our religious tradition has largely lost the language to deal with something like happened this week, because someone decided that the United States was the enemy and that there are no innocents here, because someone decided that their own lives and the lives of all those people on the planes in and around those buildings were expendable. The Pentagon lies in rubble, the Twin Towers are no more, and a plane load of heroes lies dead in the Pennsylvania field. How are we to make sense of that? One response is to name the act and the persons who committed it evil, and so separate ourselves from them. Hopefully, we won't take the step of expanding demonization. You and I are not likely to start saying that all Muslims or all Afghanis are at fault and should pay for this. We're not likely to generalize that way, although I've already heard some of us speak words that come disturbingly close. But even if we're specific in our demonization, targeting only the particular people who are in fact responsible, we are still, I believe, making a mistake. Ta-Nehisi Coates is a national correspondent for The Atlantic, an author, and clearly still trying to make sense of it. A college friend of his was murdered in 2000. He wrote, "The world had ended for my old friend, much as it had ended for the victims of 9/11. But whereas we were hell-bent on bringing justice to Al-Qaeda, I knew there would be no justice for Prince. The cop would keep his job, they'd rule the murder justifiable, and people would accept the death. It's the cost of doing business. And it's a cost borne mostly by us." I can't tell you how angry that made me. And anger breeds hate and blindness. And so for a good year after 9/11, I was blind. I couldn't feel what the city was feeling. My son was almost 2, and the thought of raising him right and him still becoming a cost of doing business filled me with fear and more anger. In his 2000 book, Between the World and Me, a love letter to his teenage son, he continues, "We arrived 2 months before September 11th, 2001. I suppose everyone who was in New York that day has a story. Here's mine. That evening, I stood on the roof of an apartment building with your mother, your Aunt Shauna, and her boyfriend, Jamal. So we were there on the roof, talking and taking in the sight. Great plumes of smoke covered Manhattan Island. Everyone knew someone who was missing. But looking out upon the ruins of America, my heart was cold. I had disasters all my own. The officer who killed Prince Jones, like all the officers who regard us so warily, was the sword of the American citizenry. I would never consider any American citizen pure. I was out of sync with the city. I kept thinking about how Southern Manhattan, how it had always been ground zero for us. They auctioned our bodies down there in that same devastated, rightly named financial district. And there was once a burial ground for the auction there. They built a department store over it and then tried to erect a government building over another part. Only a community of right-thinking Black people stopped them. I had not formed any of this into a coherent theory, but I did know that bin Laden was not the first man to bring terror to that section of the city. I never forgot that. Neither should you. In the days after, I watched the ridiculous pageantry of flags, the machismo of firemen, the overwrought slogans. Damn it all. Prince Jones was dead. And hell upon those who tell us to be twice as good and shoot us no matter. Hell for ancestral fear that puts Black parents under terror. And hell upon those who shatter the holy vessel. I could see no difference between the officer who killed Prince Jones and the police who died, or the firefighters who died. They were not human to me. Black, white, or whatever, they were menaces of nature. They were the fire, the comet, the storm, which could, with no justification, shatter my body. For if they are evil and we are not, if that's how we see things, then we are committing the same kind of error which led to this tragedy. That's the problem of evil. Not so much that it exists, and that is really just a fact of life or a force of nature. The problem of evil, as I see it, is that we are so readily tempted to imagine that it's out there, separated from us over here, that it belongs to them and not us. And that, I believe, is ultimately the root and the design of evil, to make us categorize the world into us and them, rather than recognizing our common kinship. Stay with me here a moment. The core of our Unitarian Universalist faith, and the core of all the religious faiths that I know of, points to the truth that we are part of a family that includes all of creation. You and I, and caterpillars and stars, and even anti-American terrorists are, in truth, part of one family, children of one divine reality. We call it the interdependent web of existence. Martin Luther King called it an inescapable network of mutuality. Theists call it the family of God. Whatever we call it, and we do have lots of names, the truth remains that our faith teaches that what is real is our connectedness. So I believe that a working definition of evil could be whatever distracts us from our essential relatedness. In other words, whatever convinces you that I am not your brother, whatever gets me to think of you as anything less than my kin, that thing is evil. So even this distinction of good and evil can be seen as one of evil's most pernicious tools, for it tempts us to think of evil and good as separate from one another. The eminent Swiss psychologist Carl Jung once wrote, "The individual who wishes to have an answer to the problem of evil has need, first and foremost, of self-knowledge. That is, in the utmost possible knowledge of his own wholeness. He must know relentlessly how much good he can do and what crimes he is capable of, and must be aware of regarding the one as real and the other illusion. Both are elements within his nature, and both are bound to come in light. Both are bound to come to light in him, should he wish, as he ought, to live without self-deception or self-delusion." In his book, Peace is Every Step, the Venerable Thich Nhat Hanh, Buddhist monk and poet, writes about receiving a letter about a 12-year-old girl, a refugee, whose boat was attacked by sea pirates. The pirates raped the girl and she threw herself into the ocean and drowned. He writes, "When you first learn of something like that, you get angry at the pirate. You naturally take the side of the girl. And if you take the side of the little girl, then it's easy. You only have to take a gun and shoot the pirate. But we cannot do that." From out of his deep meditation, Nhat Hanh wrote a poem, "Call Me by My True Names." I am the mayfly metamorphosing on the surface of the river, and I am the bird which when spring comes arrives to eat the mayfly. I am the frog swimming happily in the clear pond, and I am also the grass snake approaching in silence, who feeds itself upon the frog. I am the child in Uganda, all skin and bones, my legs as thin as bamboo sticks. And I am the arms merchant selling deadly weapons to a Uganda. I am the 12-year-old girl refugee on the small boat who throws herself into the ocean after being raped by a sea pirate. And I am the pirate, my heart not yet capable of seeing and loving. My joy is like spring, so warm it makes flowers bloom in all walks of life. My pain is like a river of tears, so full it fills the four oceans. Please call me by my true names, so I can hear all my cries and laughs at once, so I can see that my joy and pain are one. Please call me by my true names, so I can wake up and so the door of my heart can be left open, the door of compassion. This is the religious response to evil, not setting it apart and intensifying the illusion of separation, but recognizing, as Jung said, both how much good we ourselves can do and what crimes we ourselves are capable of. Recognizing that both are a part of each of us, that both are found in me. As Jesus said, let the one without sin cast the first stone. Oh, it is easy to get angry at them, whether them as those who are responsible for the attacks on the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, or those who are responsible for the bloodshed and anguish in Israel and Palestine, or today in all the places of the world where war ravages, or on the streets of America. They do such horrible, such horrendous things. And we want retribution. We want revenge. We want someone to pay, which is just what they said before the stones were hurled and the bombs set off and the planes hijacked. This cannot be our response to evil, because this is just what evil wants. Today, I say to you, with all the conviction in my soul, that we must take the harder route, opening our hearts rather than closing them, looking with compassion, not only on those who are suffering, but also on those who caused the suffering. This is how universal salvation and Timothy McVeigh are reconciled, because in truth, such reconciliation is our only hope. It's not easy, but unless we respond to violence with peace, to hatred with love, to fear with faith, the cycle will only continue. Gandhi is remembered as having said, "An eye for an eye will leave the whole world blind." Far from having nothing to say about evil, our Unitarian Universalist faith tells us that the face of evil is the face of alienation, of separation, of us and them. And our Unitarian Universalist faith tells us that the only response to a tragedy such as this is to look through the eyes of what is best within ourselves, opening the door of compassion and remembering our place in our common family. In the weeks, months, and years ahead, our resolve will be tested, as much as I wish I was wrong. Tuesday's tragedies will not be the last blow struck against us. We will be tempted to enter into a battle we cannot win, for the battle itself is the enemy. But there is another choice. We can say no to death and yes to life, over and over and over again, no matter how hard it becomes. We can refuse to let go of our faith in the essential goodness of humanity, even in the light of how horrendously evil our acts can be. We can refuse to settle for the simplistic solution of an eye for an eye, even when it's our own eye that's been shattered. We can refuse to replace the love in our hearts with hate, even when we ourselves suffer indistinguishable anguish. In 1965, James Baldwin wrote these words from my dungeon shook letter to my nephew on the 100th anniversary of the Emancipation. We, with love, shall force our brothers to see themselves as they are, to cease fleeing from reality and begin to change it. For this is your home, my friend. Do not be driven from it. Great men have done great things here and will again. And we can make America what America must become. It will be hard, James, but you come from sturdy peasant stock, men who picked cotton and dammed rivers and built railroads, and in the teeth of the most terrifying odds, achieved an unassailable and monumental dignity. You come from a long line of great poets, some of the greatest poets since Homer. One of them said, "The very time I thought I was lost, my dungeon shook and my chains fell off." You know, and I know, that the country is celebrating 100 years of freedom, 100 years too soon. We cannot be free until they are free. I'll end with these words from Reverend Danielle DeBona, extracted from the Service of the Living Tradition, General Assembly 2020. This is a time of great responsibility for people who claim a liberal faith. But we cannot articulate what it means to both liberal and faithful. If we do that, we will become like a tree in the forest. Nobody hears it falls, and nobody cares. So let us mull over the revival of relationships. I have watched for over 30 years many of our congregations in action. It is often a beautiful thing. It is just as often discouraging and disappointing. When we cannot or choose not to dig deeply into our relationships with one another within our congregations, we break the very essence of what it means to be a people of faith. People who want to build the brave and beloved community, both within and outside of our building, they guide us to become more selfless, less self-centered, more just, less judgmental, more loving, and less afraid. If you believe you are part of this community who wants to build a brave, beloved community, I charge you to wrap yourself in the banner of bravery and bring forth the good news to your community. The good news that Unitarian Universalism is love, and we will not back down from hatred and fear.
Thank you, Mary. That's a lot to think about in this next week, next month. Thank you so much. Normally at this time, we receive offerings from our congregants. However, due to the virtual format of this service, we invite you to make your offering in one of the methods shown on the slideshow. These methods will also be posted in the newsletter and on the UUC website itself. Please keep in mind that our congregation is entirely self-governed by the democratic process. One of the privileges of our free church tradition is to provide all of the financial support for our many ministries from among ourselves. Generosity, therefore, is one of the spiritual values we recognize as central to our personal and our institutional well-being. You are invited to participate in the blessing of giving by sending us an offering. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Our thanks for all gifts given and received for the work of this community. Now, let us sing the doxology. are in singing mode. Please join us in singing the closing hymn, O Light of Life, number 117.
Well, I was gonna give it to you.
Oh.
Well, it's only, okay, so just so you know, because we have Jan here, I've asked her to play the last hymn with me, which you didn't know about until just now. It's hymn number 117, and I'm doing it in C minor. Jan, which is lower, I transposed it yesterday. It'd be a big help to me because these are really hard chords to play the guitar. Okay. The introduction is the last 4 measures. And the tempo is. Yeah. Well, no, I guess that's not. Can you hold the book for her? Or should I just go? Go ahead. I'll start. Maybe she'll join me. And you join me, please. Oh, light of life that lives in us, help us to turn away from war. Reveal thy hate that lives in us, help us to live no more in fear. Save us, save our children. Oh, light of love, break down on us. Help us to heal our wounded world. Our dying forest, flooded plains, save us, save our children. Oh, love of life that lives in me, help me to lift my head and sing. Let me know joy as well as pain. See beauty in the fragrant wind. Save me, save my children. Oh, light of life and love in us, help us to open eyes and ears. Reach out and listen, touch and love, that we may stand in strength and peace. Save us, save our children.
Thank you, Jan and Mary. Now, let us recite the valediction. We extinguish the flame of this chalice, and we know that the light of truth and love and the warmth of this community go with us until we meet again. After the benediction, please move your arrow to the top right of your screen and click the gallery view button. Now Mary will give us our benediction. I've got here.
If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and that were necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line dividing good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being. And who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart?
Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Thank you.